News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Severide in Washington, Hughes Rudd in Atlanta, Georgia, Robert Pierpoint in Houston, Texas, Bill Plant in Chicago, Ike Pappas in Chicago, Richard Threlkeld in Compton, California, and Neil Strasser in Washington.
Good evening. For the second time in 3 months, a helicopter has crashed in the Los Angeles area, killing everyone aboard. The site of today's tragedy was Compton. CBS News reporter Richard Threlkeld has the story.
Los Angeles Airways Flight 417 left the city's international airport at mid-morning with 18 passengers and a crew of 3, bound for Disneyland. But the commuter helicopter got only as far as the Los Angeles suburb of Compton. Then, according to witnesses, it began coming apart in midair. One section of the big 28-passenger helicopter fell into an empty lot. Another chunk dropped into a busy street intersection. What was left of the main fuselage crashed only yards away from a playground, narrowly missing hundreds of small children. No one on the ground was injured, but there were no survivors among those aboard. Scores of eyewitnesses said they saw the crash. One of them, Jonathan Dollar, said he heard the engine give out, then looked up to see a rotor come off and watched in horror as the helicopter crashed in flames.
And while I was in the street coming this way, it made contact with the ground, and then was an envelopment of flame. It just ballooned. Not an explosion, but the flame, the entire length of the structure was on fire simultaneously. And from the mass of the flames, there was some other fellow coming, and he says, "There's one man hanging out. Let's get him." So we made one pass up within 6 feet of him. At the time, there was a secondary internal balloon, and we jumped back. We tried to, the flames was getting higher and wider, so we tried to crawl under. The second time, we couldn't get within 20 feet of the helicopter, the man hanging out.
All 21 aboard died either on impact or in the explosion and fire that followed. This shuttle helicopter was flying the same route of another Los Angeles Airways flight, which crashed 3 months ago just 2 miles away. That accident took 23 lives, the worst helicopter crash in U.S. history. The airline has suspended its flights pending the arrival of a 10-member investigating team that the Federal Aviation Agency is flying out from Washington. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, Compton, California.
Parker Paint Company sponsored this ballpoint marathon because Parker wins, that's why. They're off. Each poor contestant draws a line with a different make of ballpoint pen to show how they all came out in a real laboratory test. Let's see how far they all go. Parker's the man in red. Well, fans, here's our first loser, 6,500 feet. Nice try for 19 cents. Uh-oh. The end of the line for the 450 entry, 7,200 feet. Out goes the dollar number at 8,600 feet. That's it for the $1.95 contender at 16,000 feet. Now, guess who's out there keeping the ball rolling all alone? Parker, 25,000, 28,000 feet. The $1.98 Parker Jotter wins by more than a mile, more than 2 miles. If you don't get the jotter, you don't get the point.
American and North Vietnamese negotiators in Paris held their 17th meeting today, and the negative results knocked down speculation of an imminent breakthrough in the talks. Hanoi's representatives renewed their demand for a complete halt in the air war, charging that the current announced policy of limited bombing was only a cover-up for intensifying raids against the North. U.S. Ambassador Averell Harriman, in turn, accused the communists of planning a new large-scale offensive in the South. In the war itself, a big tropical storm in the Gulf of Tonkin limited American bombers to 31 missions over North Vietnam, and that was the lowest total in 2 years. In the South, Allied troops reported they had killed 181 Viet Cong after 3 days of fighting in the Mekong Delta. American losses were 17 killed, 27 wounded. Many Democrats, in the wake of the Republican convention, are calling for streamlining their party get-together in Chicago. The 3 declared presidential candidates each spoke out on the subject today. First, George McGovern, with a telegram he sent to party chairman John Bailey.
I recommend that floor demonstrations on behalf of candidates put in nomination for the presidency and vice presidency be eliminated. The sight of grown men and women cavorting around the convention floor simply is not in keeping with the serious business we are going to Chicago to consider. Delegates should be asked to cast the votes of their states with the minimum of local advertising. Committees to advise candidates that they are wanted in the convention hall should be eliminated. The candidates know full well they are wanted in the hall, having watched the events on television. Other measures could be taken which could streamline the convention and enhance the businesslike appearance of our sessions. And let me just add that I think the American people are sick and tired of hoopla at these national conventions. They're interested in two things: the issues and the programs that the convention brings before the delegates and before the people. And they're interested, secondly, in the nominating process. And both of those important tasks of a national convention can be conducted better if we eliminate some of the extraneous demonstrations that simply waste time and bore the American public.
Senator Eugene McCarthy, in addressing himself to the subject of demonstrations, told CBS newsman Bob Gregory he'd like to see a new approach taken.
We've given some thought to a different kind of demonstration, or a different use of that time, which I think is probably a better way to proceed than simply putting a limit on the time of the demonstration. I think if we're going to have the standard demonstration, I think we just soon eliminate it altogether rather than put any limit on the time.
Well, what is your idea? What would you like to do with the time?
We hope we might use it for somewhat by way of educational purpose, or some educational television.
Well, how would that work?
We haven't quite ready. Well, the time would be there, and the space is there in the aisles, and we think we might be able to do something that would contribute to the information of the delegates and probably to the electorate that might be watching. A little bit of creative producing, we hope.
It's a very interesting idea. Can you tell us more?
No, it's still right in the formative stage. I don't know whether it will develop or not, but if it doesn't, why, we'd be quite ready to put limits on the demonstrations or cut them out altogether.
Vice President Humphrey also called for the convention to spend more time on what he called the overriding substantive matters and less on, quote, the frills and the nonsense. He also said again the convention should be an open one. While the candidates are calling for a smooth and open convention in Chicago, others are planning ways to disrupt it, or at least to make their dissident views known. And, as Ike Pappas reports, some of those groups already have run into trouble.
The Illinois branch of the American Civil Liberties Union went to court today to fight for the use of this stadium, Soldier Field, just south of the Chicago Loop. The ACLU filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Coalition for an Open Convention. The coalition, formed to stop a first ballot nomination of Hubert Humphrey, wants to hold a rally here convention week. It asked for a permit several weeks ago, but no permit came. The ACLU suggests Mayor Richard Daley is stalling, favoring Humphrey.
It looks to us very much as if the Democratic Party, therefore, is then using it to keep other groups from using it. Now, you just can't do that. It's a public facility. It's paid for by taxpayers. It's not Mayor Daley's private home in which he can make decisions on how it's used in that way. If they had specific plans, and these people could have been told that months ago and could have gone to seek another site.
The Chicago Park District denied favoritism. Bill Plant spoke with its president.
Now, they say that we're stalling it. Not true. We're trying to, under very difficult circumstances, and due to the many activities in Chicago at this time, come up with the correct and proper answer, and nobody will be denied their rights in any fashion whatsoever.
Others wanting space but not getting it thus far are the Yippies, who describe themselves as politically involved hippies. The Yippies want to use a large part of Lincoln Park to hold their own convention. Yippie leader Abby Hoffman says that he will also file suit. What's this demonstration going to be like? What's this convention of yours going to be like?
Well, it's going to be an expression of another society, of a free society. We're going to establish a liberated zone, surely by our vast numbers. And we'll have workshops on the things that concern us: drugs, guerrilla theater, underground media, setting up of communes, living free. We'll have beach parties, we'll have rock festivals, we'll have food, and we'll do it all free.
And you're going to nominate your own candidate?
We're supporting a pig called Pegasus, and we'll have a rally and a nomination speech, and we'll present him to the Democrats, saying, you show us your pig, we'll show you ours. We're also asking for Secret Service protection for the pig because he's been threatened by the BLT conspiracy. A lot of mean people in this country don't like pigs.
The Yippies say that they will stage their demonstrations with or without city sanction. Mayor Daley has thus far remained silent about the charges that he is trying to keep the dissenters down and out of public property. The city says it has need for such places as parks and grounds, mainly to house security forces. But as Hal Fisher discovered, the police are thinking of a special use for Soldiers Field.
Well, I can't see 100,000 violators, but we have tremendous facilities here to accommodate them. We have soldier fields. We have different spots that have been set aside.
So if they don't have reservations, you'll make them.
Yeah, we'll accommodate them if this is what they want. We hope this isn't what they want. I think they have a right to demonstrate in a free society, but if they violate the law, we have to step in.
The basic question in the lawsuit, of course, is whether the city of Chicago and Mayor Daley will get to use this stadium or whether the dissenters will get to use it. And thus far, the odds are riding heavily with Mayor Daley. Ike Pappas, CBS News, Chicago.
Humphrey McCarthy, by the way, will be staying at the Chicago Convention Headquarters Hotel with most of the party's leaders. The vice president is to have a $175 a day, 5-room suite on the 25th floor. McCarthy is to be on the 23rd floor in a 5-room suite that goes, for some reason, for $195 a day. Humphrey tonight said the nation's current problems require a strong and active president, strong enough, he says, to shake up the federal bureaucracy and clean out what he termed the cobweb of relationships between federal agencies, states, cities, and private organizations. In San Diego, Richard Nixon met with more Republican leaders today and telephoned others as he pushed for party unity behind his presidential campaign. He spoke by telephone with Governors Chafee of Rhode Island, Evans of Washington, Love of Colorado, and Levander of Minnesota, all one-time Rockefeller backers. Nixon also named one of Rockefeller's top strategists, Kentucky Senator Thurston Morton, as a special traveling campaign advisor. Pennsylvania Governor Raymond Schaefer, whose convention delegation did not support the first ballot nominations of either Nixon or running mate Spiro Agnew, pledged to support the ticket today as long as the campaign is broad-based and does not exclude any regional or minority groups. A Maryland taxpayers group has gone into court to ask that the office of governor be declared vacant, since Spiro Agnew is likely to be out of the state campaigning much of the time in coming months. A court order granted today gives Agnew 30 days to reply to that suit, although he already has said he has no intention of resigning. Some Maryland Democrats who control the legislature and would name a successor if a vacancy occurred have been insisting Agnew step down.
Who says men don't care about their hair? You care about your hair, so don't smear grease on it. Spread Vitalis through it. Vitalis has no grease. And Vitalis spreads to keep your hair looking fresh and clean, not stiff or sticky. Vitalis has no grease.
Get ready backstage.
Your first PTA fashion show. You're getting ready to go on. What a time for a headache. You could take aspirin, but Bufferin goes to work in half the time. Half the time. Why? Because in the first critical minutes, Bufferin speeds its pain reliever to your headache twice as fast as simple aspirin.
And now,
So Bufferin goes to work in half the time. Half the time. That's Bufferin's time.
New Jersey Governor Richard Hughes, head of the Credentials Committee of the Democratic Convention, said today his group will hear challenges to seating delegations from 18 states. The committee hearings, which begin Monday in Chicago, will start with the dispute over the Mississippi delegation, in which the regular party slate is being challenged by a racially balanced group. Another group of Democrats held a planning session today in the Deep South. CBS News correspondent Hughes Rudd reports from Atlanta.
Democratic Party leaders from Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, North and South Carolina, and Georgia met in Atlanta today to plot Southern strategy for the Democratic Convention in Chicago. The meeting was closed, and if they discussed George Wallace, they wouldn't admit it. Their spokesman, James Gray of Georgia, in effect delivered a roll call of Southern governors, saying that each of them would make a splendid vice presidential candidate on the ticket with Hubert Humphrey.
We list them alphabetically. We're talking about John Connally of Texas, Buford Ellington of Tennessee, John McKithen of Louisiana, Bob McNair of South Carolina, Carl Sanders of Georgia, Terry Sanford of North Carolina, and George Smathers of Florida.
Missing was the name of Georgia's Governor Lester Maddox, who's expected to announce on Saturday that he will be a candidate for the presidency itself. Mr. Gray explained why Maddox wasn't on the list.
It was not brought up, and Governor Maddox has not announced his intentions, and so I would be presuming if I tried to declare for him.
He does.
Well, I don't know. I couldn't answer the question.
On the assumption that Mr. McCarthy winds up as Mr. Humphrey's vice presidential running mate, what would the South do? Do you think you'd lose it?
Be unpalatable to the South, I'd say.
The men at this meeting maintain that with a Southerner on the ticket, the Democrats would have a good chance to carry the South. Conversely, they obviously think that Senator McCarthy's name on the ballot would drive the old Confederacy straight into the arms of George Wallace and his American Independent Party. But that seems to be where a lot of unreconstructed Confederates are headed anyway. With Mr. Wallace tearing up the political pea patch, the question is whether or not these loyal organization Democrats are not simply whistling Dixie when they talk about a Humphrey victory down south. Hughes Rudd, CBS News, Atlanta.
In Nigeria's civil war, advancing federal troops have forced a new wave of refugees into Aba, one of the last strongholds of the Biafran rebels. Nigerian commanders said 2 of their brigades that had pushed off from Porakor were within 15 miles of Aba. Biafra Radio claimed that reinforced rebel units were holding their ground at that point and, in fact, had recaptured one town from federal forces. Reports out of Athens today said Greek police have arrested more than 100 persons in connection with yesterday's attempted assassination of Premier George Papadopoulos. Among them were a number of high-ranking officers and political opponents, including the husband of Athens newspaper publisher Helen Vlachos. She fled to London last December after escaping house arrest. And Communist Romania's president, Nicolae Ceausescu, appeared to be warning the Russians today not to use force against Czechoslovakia's new liberal regime. Speaking in Bucharest, he said there could be no justification for intervention by the Warsaw Military Pact in the internal affairs of a Soviet bloc nation. Ceausescu, along with Yugoslavia's Tito, supported the Czechoslovaks in their recent confrontation with Moscow.
Out here at Roundup, a day seems about a week long. It starts before the sun does. All day long, you're cutting cows and picking little old strays out of the mesquite. And just when you think the day's getting over, there's still a lot of work to do. But I'll tell you something. There's never been a working day yet when you couldn't take time for a good smoke.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
President Johnson made an unexpected trip today from his Texas ranch to Houston, where he addressed a meeting of the predominantly Negro National Medical Association. CBS News White House correspondent Robert Pierpoint reports.
The president appealed to the nation's medical professions to keep costs and fees down. Otherwise, he warned that Medicare could be smeared by scandal and disgrace. And he added, it's too good a thing to become a racket. Then he switched to a subject of special concern to his largely Negro audience.
seeking freedom is not always a pleasant task. And I hope that we'll make it so in this country that we don't have to violate laws and we don't have to be guilty of breaking the peace, and we don't have to endanger health and life for us to get justice. Not even the president has the right to say what law he will abide by or what law he won't abide by in this country. But every law ought to be fair and equal for everybody, from the president to the street sweeper or vice versa.
The Negro doctors also applauded the president's call for nationwide help to recruit and train more talented Negro students for the medical professions. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, Houston.
In Washington, Attorney General Ramsey Clark called a news conference today to answer criticism leveled at him by Richard Nixon and other Republicans. Clark was asked how it feels to have become an issue in the campaign.
It was something of a disappointment to me. I think there are real issues in this election. They're very important, and the American people need to know where the candidates stand on each issue. I know where I stand, and I've tried to tell the American public. I stand for effective gun control. I stand for professionalization of police. I stand for massive new efforts to control delinquency among juveniles. And these are the issues that need discussing. I hope all the candidates will address themselves directly to the issues and not to personalities.
Governor Agnew of Maryland has said that it's necessary for police to be allowed to take some action against looters, shooting whatever is appropriate, in order to maintain respect for the law. Do you agree with that?
The way you put it, when you say some sort of action, of course you have to agree with it. Looters must be arrested. But to shoot looters in lieu of arrest is to engage in a course of conduct that would damage this country immensely. The way you stop looters are by adequate manpower in law enforcement, professionally trained manpower that acts quickly whenever any disturbance that can lead to any lawlessness arises. And law enforcement knows this throughout the United States, and thank God law enforcement in the United States has not resorted to shooting looters. We arrest them.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference meeting in Memphis reportedly decided today, at least for the moment, not to endorse any presidential candidate. However, the organization is expected to step up voter registration drives this fall in districts where Negroes hold the balance of power. The Memphis conference runs through Saturday. Eugene Bull Hairston, the leader of a Negro gang on Chicago's South Side, today was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison for soliciting a 14-year-old to commit murder. Members of Hairston's Blackstone Rangers recently served as instructors in an anti-poverty program, but after Senate hearings in Washington, funds for the program were cut off. Representative Wilbur Mills said today that no matter who becomes president in January, he'll undoubtedly need to continue all or part of the 10% tax surcharge through the next fiscal year. The chairman of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee says new presidents always have new programs, and these cost money. Pope Paul, without mentioning the controversy over his stand against artificial birth control, today warned that too many Catholics minimize the concept of sin and make their own moral rules. This seemed to be a rebuke to theologians who do not regard the birth control encyclical as binding on Catholics. Well, it's rather nice to know that America doesn't have all the problems. The world's most undisciplined pedestrian, that's what a youth newspaper in Moscow today called the Soviet citizen. He's causing 70% of the nation's traffic accidents. The paper complained the rate's going up all the time. There have been appeals to the pedestrian's conscience and attempts to educate him, but both have failed. The paper's solution: the old-fashioned capitalist method of fining Soviet jaywalkers, which seems like a pretty pedestrian solution.
You get many different descriptions of a common complaint.
It's a stuffy, uncomfortable feeling for me.
It's a tense, tight, burning sensation.
An upset stomach.
I suppose it's a very precise description. All I know is that, it's a rotten, miserable feeling.
Recognize your description of heartburn and acid indigestion. People are affected differently, but one product relieves all those symptoms. Digel, the extra action antacid, with the extra action of simethicone. This white layer of Digel contains effective antacids to neutralize excess acid. This yellow layer contains simethicone in a patented formulation that breaks up frothy bubbles of gas to help relax your tense, tight stomach. So whatever you call indigestion distress, remember Digel with simethicone is the extra action antacid that brings you more complete relief, tablets or liquid.
Now to Washington and Eric Severide for some thoughts on the forthcoming Democratic Convention. Eric?
An old-time newspaper editor once said in reply to criticism of his paper's contents, "What the good Lord permits to happen, we are not too proud to print." The good Lord has permitted national party conventions to happen in the way they happen for a long time now, and neither newspapers nor television can, in any large degree, make the event more entertaining or more solemn than it is by nature. So there will be a sense of hope all around from today's recommendations by both Senator McGovern and Vice President Humphrey that efforts to streamline the Democratic Convention should include elimination of those floor demonstrations in favor of candidates placed in nomination. McGovern says the demonstrations are undignified. Humphrey says they are phony. They are, of course, as spontaneous as a Japanese ballet and considerably less graceful. It is hard to see who will be injured by their elimination, save the manufacturers of balloons and placards. Elimination of the phalanxes of pretty girls in miniskirts, however, would be too traumatic a break with continuity, even for middle-aged delegates, and would just widen the generational gap. And the good Lord is not expected to let that happen. The McGovern and Humphrey proposals, along with the McCarthy plan for reorganizing the whole party structure, are among the impulses for reason and logic now in motion. But Washington observers are having trouble trying to detect the elements of reason and logic in the candidacy of Senator McGovern and in what may be the imminent candidacy of Georgia's Governor Maddox, the first politician to be identified with the axe handle since the early youth of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln had rail splitting in mind, of course, Maddox skull splitting. McGovern was talked into entering by some of the intellectual wine tasters from the now disbanded Kennedy Court, whose sensitive palates find McCarthy not precisely the right vintage. Anti-administration as they may be, they could end up helping Vice President Humphrey's prospects. Those right-wing Southern leaders working on Governor Maddox could end up aiding the prospects of Senator McCarthy, whom they like even less than they like Humphrey. But the real objective, very probably, is to force Humphrey rightward in his public statements. They don't like to drift to those statements now, and in his ultimate choice of a vice president. As some things are going at the moment, the Chicago affair may not be a convention, but a happening. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Wednesday, August 14th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.